again, friends. So, I put a poll on my Patreon page because I had been asked to read a little H.P. Lovecraft short story. Well, by short story, they meant a 10-chapter tiny novella. So I was hoping when I asked, you would say, "Oh, that's too big and too long." You did not. So, we are going to start Spooky Month a little early, and I am going to read 2 chapters a week, which is what you all voted for. However, if you don't really like scary stories, don't worry. I have many, many, many more stories on my channel. Please go and look there. Maybe you might find something that interests you more. However, now you can join me as we begin the Dunwich Horror. When a traveler in north-central Massachusetts takes the wrong fork at the junction of Aylesbury Pike just beyond Dean's Corners, he comes upon a lonely and curious country. The ground gets higher, and the briar-bordered stone walls press closer and closer against the ruts of the dusty, curving road. The trees of the frequent forest belts seem too large, and wild weeds, brambles, and grasses attain a luxuriance not often found in settled regions. At the same time, the planted fields appear singularly few and barren, while the sparsely scattered houses wear a surprisingly uniform aspect of age, squalor, and dilapidation. Without knowing why, one hesitates to ask directions from the gnarled, solitary figures spied now and then crumbling on the doorsteps or on the sloping, rock-strewn meadows. Those figures are so silent and furtive that one feels somehow confronted by forbidden things, with which it would be better to have nothing to do. When a rise in the road brings the mountains in view above the deep woods, the feeling of strange uneasiness is increased. The summits are too rounded and symmetrical to give a sense of comfort and naturalness. And sometimes the sky silhouettes with especial clearness the queer circles of tall stone pillars with which most of them are crowned. Gorges and ravines of problematical depth intersect the way, and the crude wooden bridges always seem of dubious safety. When the road dips again, there are stretches of marshland that one instinctively dislikes, and indeed almost fears at evening, when unseen whippoorwills chatter and the fireflies come out in abnormal profusion to dance to the raucous, creepily insistent rhymes of stridently piping bullfrogs. Boy, this sounds like a place no one ever should visit. I think next time I'm going to Disneyland. The thin, shining line of the Miskatonic upper reaches has an oddly serpent-like suggestion as it winds close to the feet of the domed hills among which it rises. As the hills draw nearer, one heeds their wooded sides more than their stone-crowned tops. Those sides loom up so darkly and precipitously that one wishes they would keep their distance. But there is no road by which to escape them. Across a covered bridge, one sees a small village huddled between the stream and the vertical slope of Round Mountain, and wonders at the cluster of rotting gambrel roofs, bespeaking an earlier architectural period than that of the neighboring region. It is not reassuring to see, on a closer glance, that most of the houses are deserted and falling to ruin, and that the broken steepled church now harbors the one slovenly mercantile establishment of the hamlet. One dreads to trust the tenebrious tunnel of the bridge, yet there is no way to avoid it. Once across, it is hard to prevent the impression of a faint, malign odor about the village street, as of the massed mold and decay of centuries. It is always a relief to get clear of the place and to follow the narrow road round the base of the hills and across the level country beyond it, till it rejoins the Aylesbury Pike. Afterwards, one sometimes learns that one has been through Dunwich. Outsiders visit Dunwich as seldom as possible, and since a certain season of horror, all the signboards pointing toward it have been taken down. The scenery, judged by any ordinary aesthetic canon, is more than commonly beautiful, yet there is no influx of artists or summer tourists. 2 centuries ago, when talk of witch blood, Satan worship, and strange for its presences was not laughed at, it was the custom to give reasons for avoiding the locality. In our sensible age, since the Dunwich Horror of 1928 was hushed up by those who had the town's and the world's welfare at heart, people shun it without knowing exactly why. Well, maybe because it's creepy. I think that's a good reason to shun it. Are you guys sure you want me to read this?
Yes.
Oh. Perhaps one reason, though it cannot apply to uninformed strangers, is that the natives are now repellently decadent, having gone far along the path of retrogression so common in many New England backwaters. They have come to form a race by themselves, with well-defined mental and physical stigmata of degeneracy and inbreeding. The average of their intelligence is woefully low, whilst their annals reek of overt viciousness and of half-hidden murders, incest, and deeds of almost unnameable violence and perversity. The old gentry, representing the 2 or 3 armigerous families which came from Salem in 1692, have kept somewhat above the general level of decay. Armigerous is bearing arms, like a shield. Though many branches are sunk in the sordid populace so deeply that only their names remain as a key to the origin they disgrace. Some of the Wadleys and bishops still send their eldest sons to Harvard and Miskatonic, though those sons seldom return, and the moldering gambrel of grooves under which they and their ancestors were born. No one, even those who have the facts concerning the Regent Horror, can say just what is the matter with Dunwich. Though old legends speak of unhallowed rites and conclaves of the Indians, amidst which they called forbidden shapes of shadows out of the great rounded hills and made wild, organistic prayers that were answered by loud cracklings and rumblings from the ground below. A little note about H.P. Lovecraft. He didn't age well. He wasn't known for being a forward-thinking man. In 1747, the Reverend Albiah Hoadley, newly come to the Congregational Church at Dunwich Village, preached a memorable sermon on the close presence of Satan and his imps, in which he said, "It must be allowed that these blasphemies of an infernal train of demons are matters of too common knowledge to be denied. The cursed voices of Azrael and Bozarel, of Beelzebub and Belial, being heard now from underground by above a score of credible witnesses now living, I myself did not more than a fortnight ago catch a very plain discourse of evil powers in the hill beyond my house, wherein a rattling and rolling, groaning, screeching, and hissing, such as no things of this earth could raise up, and which must needs have come from those caves that only black magic can discover, and only the devil unlock." Mr. Hoadley disappeared soon after delivering this sermon, which I'm sure had nothing to do with anything. But the text, printed in Springfield, is still extant. Noises in the hills continue to be reported from year to year, and still form a puzzle to geologists and physiographers. Google, what is a physiographer?
In simple terms, the physiography of a region describes the physical characteristics of the region, including mountains, hills, rivers, valleys, plains, and plateaus.
Oh, I get it. It's basically another word for cartographer.
Yes. A more confusing word, but yes.
Why didn't he just say cartographer?
Because he's fancy.
Oh. Alright, Other traditions tell of foul odors near the hill-crowning circles of stone pillars and of rushing airy presences, to be heard faintly at certain hours from stated points at the bottom of the great ravines. While still others try to explain the Devil's Hop-Yard, a bleak, blasted hillside where no tree, shrub, or grass blade will grow. Then, too, the natives are mortally afraid of the numerous whippoorwills which grow vocal on warm nights. It is vowed that the birds are psychopomps.
What is a psychopomp?
I have no idea what a psychopomp is. Google, what is a psychopomp?
Psychopomp. In Greek mythology, he a guide of souls to the dead, a spiritual guide for a living person's soul. Psychopomps fear states that are amongst their dreams. I don't mean. Yeah.
So they
guide of the dead.
Steal souls?
No, not steal. Guide.
What?
They guide the dead.
Ah. Got it. Whippoorwills are death's tour guides, lying in wait for the souls of the dying, and that they time their eerie cries in unison with the sufferer's struggling breath. If they can catch the fleeing soul when it leaves the body, they instantly flutter away, chittering in demonic laughter. But if they fail, they subside gradually into a disappointed silence. These tales, of course, are obsolete and ridiculous, yet they come down from very old times. Dunwich is indeed ridiculously old, older by far than any of the communities within 30 miles of it. South of the village, one may still spy the southern walls and chimney of the ancient bishop's house, which was built before 1700, whilst the ruins of the mill at the falls, built in 1806, form the most modern piece of architecture to be seen. Industry did not flourish here, and the 19th century factory movement proved short-lived. Oldest of all are the great rings of rough-hewn stone columns on the hilltops, but these are more generally attributed to the Indians than to the settlers. Deposits of skulls and bones were found within these circles, and around the sizable table-like rock on Sentinel Hill sustained the popular belief that such spots were once the burial places of the Pocumtunks, even though many entheologists disregard the absurd improbability of such a theory, persist in believing the remains Caucasian. It was in the township of Dunwich, in a large and partly inhabited farmhouse, set against a hillside 4 miles from the village and 1.5 miles from many other dwellings, that Wilbur Whately was born at 5 a.m. on Sunday, the 2nd of February, 1913. This date was recalled because it was Candlemas, which people in Dunwich curiously observe under another name, and because the noises in the hills had sounded and all the dogs in the countryside had barked persistently throughout the night before. Less worthy of notice was the fact that the mother was one of the descendant Whateleys, a somewhat deformed, unattractive albino woman of 35, living with an aged and half-insane father about whom the most frightful tales of wizardry had been whispered in his youth. Lavinia Whately had no known husband, but according to the custom of the region made no attempt to disavow the child, concerning the other side of whose ancestry the country folk might, and did, speculate as widely as they chose. On the contrary, she seemed strangely proud of the dark, goatish-looking infant who formed such a contrast to her own sickly and pink-eyed albinism, and was heard to mutter many curious prophecies about its unusual powers and tremendous future. Lavinia was one who would be apt to mutter such things, for she was a lone creature given to wandering amidst thunderstorms in the hills and trying to read the great odorous books which her father had inherited through 2 centuries of Whateleys, and which were fast falling to pieces with age and wormholes. She'd never been to school, but was filled with disjointed scraps of ancient lore that old Whately had taught her. The remote farmhouse had always been feared because of old Whately's reputation for black magic and the unexplained death by violence of Mrs. Whately, when Lavinia was 12 years old and had not helped to make the place popular. Isolated among strange influences, Lavinia was fond of wild and grandiose daydreams and singular occupations, nor was her leisure much taken up by household cares in a home from which all standards of order and cleanliness had long since disappeared. There was a hideous screaming, which echoed above even the hill noises and the dogs barking on the night Wilbur was born. But no known doctor or midwife presided at his coming. Neighbors knew nothing of him till a week afterward, when old Watterly drove his sleigh through the snow into Dunwich village and discoursed incoherently to the group of loungers at Osborne's general store. There seemed to be a change in the old man, an added element of furtiveness in the clouded brain which suddenly transformed him from an object to a subject of fear. Though he was not one to be perpetrated by any common family event, amidst it all he shewed some trace of the pride later noticed in his daughter, and what he said of the child's paternity was remembered by many of his hearers years afterward. "I daren't care what folks think. If Lavinia's boy looked like his pa, he wouldn't look like nothing you expect. You needn't think the only folks is the folks hereabouts. Lavinia's read some, and has seen some things that most of you only tell about. I calculate her man is as good as a husband as you can find this side of Aylesbury. And if you knowed as much about the hills as I do, you wouldn't ask no better church wedding nor her'n. Let me tell you something. Some day your folks'll hear a child of Lavinia's a calling his father's name on top of Sentinel Hill." Boy, that came out of nowhere, didn't it? The only person who saw Wilbur during the first month of his life were old Zachariah Watterly and the undecayed Whateleys, and Earl Sawyer's common-law wife, Mamie Bishop. Mamie's visit was frankly one of curiosity, and her subsequent tales did justice to her observations. But Zachariah came to lead a pair of Alderney cows which old Watterly had bought of his son Curtis. This marked the beginning of a course of cattle buying on the part of small Wilbur's family, which ended only in 1928 when the Dunwich Horror came and went. Yet at no time did the ramshackle Watterly barn seem overcrowded with livestock. There came a period when people were curious enough to steal up and count the herd that grazed precariously on the steep hillside above the old farmhouse, and they could never find more than 10 or 12 anemic, bloodless-looking specimens. Eventually, some blight or distemper, perhaps sprung from the unwholesome pasturage, or the diseased fungi and timbers of the filthy barn, caused a heavy mortality amongst the Whatley animals. Old wounds or sores, having something of the aspect of incisions, seemed to afflict the visible cattle, and once or twice during the earlier months, certain callers fancied they could discern similar sores about the throats of the gray, unshaven old man and his slatternly, crinkle-haired albino daughter. It sounds like Wilbur's a vampire or something. In the spring, after Wilbur's birth, Lavinia resumed her customary rambles in the hills, bearing in her misproportioned arms the swarthy child. Public interest in the Watterleys subsided after most of the country folk had seen the baby, and no one bothered to comment on the swift development which the newcomer seemed every day to exhibit. Wilbur's growth, which was indeed phenomenal. Do-do-do-do-do. Phenomenal. Do-do-do-do. Phenomenal! For, within 3 months of his birth, he had attained a size and muscular power not usually found in infants under a full year of age. His motions and even his vocal sounds shewed a restraint and deliberateness highly peculiar in an infant, and no one was really unprepared when, at 7 months, he began to walk unassisted with falterings, which another month was sufficient to remove.
I don't think At 7 months, the skull has even, finished fusing together.
Well, maybe his skull doesn't need to finish fusing together. This is a horror, after all.
Babies are bobbleheads at that age.
I don't think he's a normal baby. It was somewhat after this time, on Halloween, that a great blaze was seen at midnight on the top of Sentinel Hill, where the old table-like stone stands amidst its tumulus and ancient bones. Considerable talk was started when Silas Bishop, of the undecayed bishops, mentioned having seen the boy running sturdily up that hill, ahead of his mother about an hour before the blaze was remarked. Silas was rounded up a stray heifer, but he nearly forgot his mission when he fleetingly spied the two figures in the dim light of his lantern. They darted almost noiselessly through the underbrush, and the astonished watchers seemed to think they were entirely unclothed. Afterward, he could not be sure about the boy, who may have had some kind of fringed belt and a pair of dark trunks or trousers on. Wilbur was never subsequently seen alive and conscious without complete and tightly buttoned attire, the disarrangement or threatened disarrangement of which always seemed to fill him with anger and alarm. His contrast with his squalid mother and grandfather in this respect was thought very notable, until the horror of 1928 suggested the most valid of reasons. The next January, gossips were mildly interested in the fact that Lavinia's black brat had commenced to talk at the age of only 11 months. His speech was somewhat remarkable, both because of its difference from the ordinary accents of the region, and because it displayed a freedom from infantile lisping of which many children of 3 or 4 might well be proud. The boy was not talkative, yet when he spoke he seemed to reflect some elusive element, wholly unpossessed by Dunwich and its denizens. The strangeness did not reside in what he said, or even in the simple idioms he used, but seemed vaguely linked with his intonation, or with the internal organs that produced the spoken sounds. So, before I say this next thing, I want you to understand I haven't actually read this story before, and I didn't see the movie, and I really haven't looked at the artwork, because I'm not a fan of horror.
There's a movie?
Yeah, there's a movie.
Really?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Andy, man, look it up.
I'm busy.
Never
No,
mind.
There's a movie. People need to trust me. It stars the guy from Quantum Leap. You know, Al. Dean Stockwell, that's it. We're getting off topic. The point is, I have not watched this, but I have a theory that this kid is a squid in a human suit.
Maybe.
People would notice that.
Yeah.
Maybe. His facial aspect, too, was remarkable for its maturity, for though he shared his mother's and grandfather's chinlessness, his firm and precociously shaped nose, united with the expression of his large, dark, almost Latin eyes, to give him an air of quasi-adulthood and well-nigh preternatural intelligence, because he's a squid. He was, however...
So, hold on. Does he have just an adult face on a baby's body?
Yes, because he's a squid. He was, however, exceedingly ugly, despite his appearance of brilliancy, there being something almost goatish or animalistic about his thick lips, large, bored, yellowish skin, coarse, crinkly hair, and oddly elongated ears.
He's a baby with an adult face. Of course he looks disturbing.
No, I'm telling you, he's a squid in a baby suit.
Squids don't have ears, at least not ones that stick out.
They do if they put their tentacles next to their head.
Okay, then he would just have to have 2 tentacles just up there constantly in the shape of ears. Would that not get exhausting?
You know, some people can hold their arms up for hours.
Yeah, hours, not
No.
days straight.
Maybe he pins them up.
That would hurt.
Okay, this is supposed to be creepy. Shush! Ooh. He was soon disliked even more decidedly than his mother and grandsire, and all conjectures about him were spiced with references to the bygone magic of old Waterley, and how the hills once shook when he shrieked the dreadful name of Yog-Sothoth, in the midst of a circle of stones, with a great book open in his arms before him. Dogs abhorred the boy, and he was always obliged to take various defensive measures against their barking menace. Well, if a dog doesn't like him. Oh, well, this is where we leave off this week. Don't forget to come back next week when we will read 2 more chapters and I will start sleeping with the light on. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. I have 2 more Lovecraft stories after this, and I think I will leave 1 more Spooky Week story, so I guess get your requests in. Please support me on Patreon, and of course there's also Facebook and Instagram. Please go check out Pixabay.com because they are the best website ever, filled by the most wonderful contributors. I cannot thank them enough. But most of all, thank you, my friends, for caring enough to watch this and vote, and gosh, I can't thank you enough for that. And now a special thank you for my Patreon friends.